News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm.
Welcome to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Thank you very much for taking some time to be with us. I want to start with two breaking news stories. One of them is a bombshell. We're going to get to that in a moment. But first, I want to address a letter written by Karen and Billy Vaughn that was posted on worldtribune.com, which has now gone viral. I say it has gone viral. Billy and Karen Vaughn lost their son, Aaron Vaughn, in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan in August 2011. He was part of the Navy SEAL Team 6 unit that killed Osama bin Laden. They have been asking a lot of questions about what they believe was an ambush of their son. But notwithstanding their own personal grief, they are now outraged at the beheading of journalist James Foley and also Stephen Sotloff, and they have written an open letter asking the President of the United States to resign. I edited this letter, published it on worldtribune.com, and immediately it went viral. It was picked up by the British press, the Daily Mail, and countless other websites. And the Vaughns have now been on Fox and Friends. They're going to be on Hannity and on Huckabee. And this story is getting more and more traction by the minute. I want to give special thanks to everybody on Facebook who rallied behind this story and really began the wave here, which is now becoming a national wave. And I opened this show with some new information. Just before coming on air, I've been dealing with a series of emails. WorldTribune.com has been contacted by a gentleman who wants to take this open letter and place it in full-page newspaper ads. He wants to pay for those full-page newspaper ads calling upon the President of the United States to resign. I applaud the citizens of this country, everybody that continues to rally behind the Vaughns, and everybody who continues to rally on behalf of American citizens currently besieged by the enemy, like people like James Foley and Stephen Sotloff and their families. Everybody who is rallying to try to get us a commander-in-chief that will actually defend our interests. I applaud everybody out there for their excellent work. We are making noise and our voices are being heard. A letter like this, a story like this, getting increasing national attention is case in point. It is proof that when we work together, we make waves. And I believe that these waves are only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Look at the incredible initiative by this gentleman who wants to take this letter and pay for ads in newspapers so that we bring more and more attention to the incredible rage that is out there against this president who is not protecting American citizens. And the letter has such power because essentially it is written by a grieving mother, one who has given the most precious gift she has, her son, in combating terrorists. And I know that the Vaughns are happy to make this sacrifice if it were for a commander-in-chief who was returning the favor of being good and kind to the troops and to American citizens, but not when there are so many questions swirling about this man's competence and also about this man's ability to defeat our enemy. So, breaking news, you're going to see that letter in newspapers across the country, and I encourage others who want to follow in this trend. Contact our publisher, contact me, and we will give you authorization to get this letter in newspapers, in your county, in your state, wherever you are, wherever you want to place it. We will help you. And I also want to encourage, if you, any one of you out there, if you are in a battleground state like North Carolina, for example, where this broadcast is primarily heard, and if you want to help us distribute this letter in newspapers across the country, we will do everything we can. And in battleground states, the Senate is up for grabs, and every little bit will help to give control of the Senate to Republicans, who then will be able to put maximum pressure on our commander-in-chief to do his job properly. So, breaking news on that front. And that is followed by a bombshell story. And I say bombshell. This week, Bret Baier, I told you that he's one of my favorite journalists in this country. You know, even though he's an anchor of Special Report, he goes the extra mile very often, and he does his own investigative reporting. Well, this week, he broke a story about Benghazi. He has interviewed 3 men who were part of the security personnel at the CIA annex, and they are telling the American public that they were indeed told to stand down 3 times. They could have rushed to the rescue of Ambassador Chris Stevens and Sean Smith. They believe they would have saved those men had they departed when they wanted to. So at around 9:30 p.m. our time, they said that they have testified now in public view that they wanted to go to the rescue, and they were told, you stay put. Listen to this.
5 minutes, we're ready. Thumbs up, we're ready to go.
Then what happened?
I said, hey, we're ready to go. Bob looks right through me and looks at the team leader and goes, you guys need to wait.
Bob was the CIA's base chief in Benghazi.
He's on the phone talking to somebody. I assumed they were trying to coordinate us to link up with 17 February.
Which is the local militia.
It had probably been 15 minutes, I think, and I got out of the car, and Bob and the team lead were standing on the front porch, and I just said, hey, you know, we need to get over there. We're losing the initiative, you know. And Bob just looked straight at me and said, stand down, you need to wait.
We're starting to get calls from the State Department, guys, saying, hey, we're taking fire. We need you guys here. We need help.
After being repeatedly told to wait, the security team says they defied orders and headed to the besieged consulate on their own. They asked repeatedly for armed air support, which never came. Looking back, the team believes that if they hadn't been delayed for nearly half an hour, things might have turned out differently. If I gave you that 30 minutes back, would Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith be alive today?
Yes, they would still be alive. My gut is yes.
You in on that?
I'd strongly believe if we'd have left immediately, they'd still be alive today.
Well, that is just heartbreaking information, absolutely heartbreaking. These are brave men that wanted to rush to the rescue, and instead of being allowed to do what was essentially their job, they were told not to move forward. They have detailed all of this information in a book that's coming out. It's called 13 Hours, the inside account of what really happened. And these 3 security contractors essentially are confirming what we've heard in other directions. Remember, there was a team that could have gone to the rescue, that could have left from Tripoli, and they too were told to stand down. And if you reflect a little bit on what we just heard, we heard that not only did they defy orders, so they did wait for 30 minutes because they thought maybe there was some coordinated military campaign that was going to be orchestrated. That really wasn't the case. So they waited, then they defied orders, they went anyways, and they were begging for air support. And that air support also never came. Unbelievable testimony, and this certainly contradicts what the administration has tried to tell us, that there were no orders to stop anybody from helping. This is clearly a blatant lie, and now it's being confirmed from multiple sources. In addition, these individuals on the ground They had no information about a spontaneous protest. They had no knowledge or information about a YouTube clip that had caused all of this animosity. Listen to this.
And I asked about that infamous YouTube video, which was blamed for the violence in Benghazi. And there was no whisper that this video was a major problem in Benghazi or something?
Didn't know about video till I got to Germany. No idea about any video, no.
In a statement to Fox News, a senior intelligence official insists that, quote, there were no orders to anybody to stand down in providing support. He used the word stand down. A number of people now, including the House Intelligence Committee, they insist no one was hindered from responding to the situation at the compound. The committee's wording was, quote, there was no stand-down order given to American personnel attempting to offer assistance that evening. So what do you say to that?
No, it happened.
It happened on the ground. All I can talk about is what happened on the ground that night.
To you?
To us. To myself twice, and to Tig once. It happened that night. That happened. We were told to wait and stand down. We were delayed 3 times.
So they were delayed not once, not twice, but 3 times. And we are being asked to believe that this delay didn't come from the highest levels of political power in this country. That is preposterous. We can ascertain with a good degree of confidence that those orders came from the very, very top, the commander-in-chief, because it is ultimately he who coordinates or halts a military operation. We know that night, by 10 o'clock, Hillary Clinton was on the phone with him. And we know by information that has been leaked by her and her husband that they immediately disapproved of the president's strategy about trying to blame this on a spontaneous protest and a YouTube video, and that they thought that there should be robust reaction to events on the ground. Well, the noose is tightening, metaphorically that is, because it is clear from all the little driblets of information that are coming out that from 9:30 to 10 o'clock, you know what the President of the United States was doing? He wasn't thinking, how am I going to rescue Sean Smith? How am I going to rescue Ambassador Chris Stevens? He was thinking, oh my, how am I going to cover my tracks? I have been telling the American people that they are safe, that Osama bin Laden is dead, that Al-Qaeda is on the run. And what I have staring at me right in the face is possibly an Al-Qaeda bloodbath. And my first priority is to make sure that I bamboozle the American people. So the last thing he wanted was a firefight. He wanted to minimize the casualties. He wanted to minimize what this was all about. And so as Ambassador Chris Stevens and Sean Smith are desperately clinging to the last remnants of their lives, this president is not thinking how to save fellow Americans. He's thinking about how to save his own bacon. And you have heroes on the ground that wanted to imperil, risk their very own lives for the sake of others. And they are being told by that coward and that traitor in the White House to do nothing. Now we know this, not just from sources on the ground, but we know it also from leaks coming out of the Clintons. So the information is damning, and it presents the portrait of a commander-in-chief who is betraying the very people that he was elected to serve. And for this reason, and for so many others, we stand with Billy and Karen Vaughn and this entire grassroots movement that is growing, calling upon the President of the United States to resign. And if he doesn't resign, we're going to do everything in our power to impeach him. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, upholding values that are never, ever going to die.
The stories that matter matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com. Thank you for joining us on this broadcast. And just to remind everybody, if you happen to miss a show, every single episode is on YouTube. Well, it looks like the President of the United States suddenly woke up and realized, hey, we're at war. He has been trying to tell us that by simply withdrawing troops from Iraq, the war on terror was coming to an end. Because he wanted it to be so, because he imagined it to be so. And he woke up to a couple of beheadings of American journalists and suddenly realized, oh my, just because I want something in my mind doesn't mean it's actually so. See, this is a process of evolving. This is a process of going from adolescence to adulthood. You suddenly realize that the world just isn't the way you want it to be. So President Obama woke up after his long vacation, after a couple beheadings, and felt that at last, it's time to acknowledge to the American people that we are at war, let alone that the terrorists have not stopped being at war with us since 9/11, preceding that, and since then, and following the withdrawal of troops from Iraq. They never stopped being at war. But in his mind, because he wanted the war to end there, he thought it would end. And like a fool, ignoring every expert's counsel, he pulled away all of our troops there, leaving the field wide open to a terrorist enemy far worse than Al-Qaeda. So finally, this week, compelled, led by an outraged public opinion, dragged, kicking and screaming by an outraged public opinion, he had to reverse himself. And reverse not just the last couple of months, but reverse everything he has been saying since the time that he was vying for office, since 2008. He had to do a complete about-face. And many commentators have said, if this was a parliamentary system, at this point, we would be able to throw him out of office purely on a no-confidence vote. You cannot say one thing for years and years and years and then go to the American public and tell them that everything you said isn't quite accurate and still remain in office. That generally just does not happen in a parliamentary system. And what you're seeing now is Democrats do not know what to do. If they abandon this president now, they're going to have to take some responsibility for the years that have passed. And yet, if they stick with him, it means that they too have to do a complete about-face of everything that they've said. So the cracks and fissures within the Democratic Party are going to be something fascinating to watch over the course of the next couple of months. But what is absolutely astonishing, interesting, and riveting right now is what are we going to do when a president who is leading a foreign policy has gotten it all wrong and is now trying to fix his errors. He is trying to turn the tide. The public no longer trusts that he can lead us in international affairs. And this week he delivered a speech declaring that we are going to destroy and eradicate ISIS. He finally has a plan. He finally has a strategy. This strategy has 4 parts, and this strategy is going to be a long-term strategy. Right before our eyes, he went from the peacenik president to the president of war. And when listening to the speech last night with my husband, I turned to him and I said, you know, if I were a Democrat, all I would be thinking right now is we are now Republican light. Many Republicans, we always chastise ourselves when we see turncoats in our party. We say, oh, that's just Democrat light. And we don't want to be Democrat light. But right now, Obama is Republican light. Because he has to do everything that Bush and Cheney were doing. But he has to do it without wanting to do it, without being fully committed to doing it. And that's why he is Republican light. The Democrats are really uncomfortable with it, and the American people are really uncomfortable with this. Now let's untangle this mess and how the president wants to get us out of it. The 4-part strategy. Part number 1. Roll it, Brittany.
We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy. First, we will conduct a systematic campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists. Working with the Iraqi government, we will expand our efforts beyond protecting our own people and humanitarian missions so that we're hitting ISIL targets as Iraqi forces go on offense. Moreover, I've made it clear that we will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven.
Okay, now, right from the start, red warning sign should be flashing in your brain. Because right there, he started to say things that are very troubling. Airstrikes, okay, the American people understands that. Airstrikes. We are seeing that in some cases they can be extremely effective. But in order to conduct successful airstrikes, you do need American forces on the ground. And you need help on the ground. So what do we face here? I don't see how, in the long run, this president or a succeeding president is going to be able to go after these terrorists simply with airstrikes. This is mission creep, and it's going to have to be so. Just a couple of months ago, he started to say we have to send advisors on the ground. We have to send intelligence on the ground. We have to send special forces on the ground because airstrikes require eyes on the ground. But what has he said here that is really, really disturbing is that not only are we going to conduct these airstrikes in Iraq, but we're going to have to go into Syria. So, not only are we returning to Iraq, but the president of peace is opening up another front in the war, another country. We're going to be going into another country, reluctantly going into a country. Remember, he didn't want to do anything in Syria for the longest time. Mitt Romney, John McCain, they've been saying for years, you got to get proactive about this civil war in Syria. Because if you don't, sooner or later, there's going to be a spillover effect into Iraq. And his whole team warned him about the possible spillover effect. But he kept saying he simply didn't want to do anything. And when he finally did stir to action, his plan was he was going to bomb Assad for the so-called use of chemical weapons. And then he changed his mind. That was a year ago. And then nothing happened. So when the public hears that he wants to go into Syria, after so many twists and turns in the Syria policy, Of course, all of the bells are ringing. All of the red flags are waving. You're opening up another front in this war when you haven't concluded the Iraqi front properly. You blew that one, and you're now going to open up another front. And you're still trying to tell us that you're going to be able to do this predominantly with airstrikes. It simply doesn't make any sense. And that takes us to point number 2 of his strategy.
Second, we will increase our support for forces fighting these terrorists on the ground. In June, I deployed several hundred American service members to Iraq to assess how we can best support Iraqi security forces. Now that those teams have completed their work and Iraq has formed a government, we will send an additional 475 service members to Iraq. As I've said before, these American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq, but they are needed to support Iraqi and Kurdish forces with training, intelligence, and equipment. We'll also support Iraq's efforts to stand up National Guard units to help Sunni communities secure their own freedom from ISIL's control.
Part 2 of the strategy. Well, think about this one. He says that what we're actually going to do is we're going to use, ultimately, Iraqi troops to do the job for us. But what have we just seen? We saw ISIS roll right over Iraqi troops. It was the very Iraqi troops that he left behind, saying that they would be good enough to withstand any pressure. They're the ones that just collapsed. They're the ones, as so many of them have been taken prisoners and beheaded. They're the ones who dropped their weapons. They're the ones who fled. They're the ones who are so divided along religious lines that they haven't been able to form a government. In other words, what forces on the ground are you talking about? What forces on the ground? And when we talk about the Iraqi security forces, are we not talking about the very same ones that George Bush and Dick Cheney have been trying to train for years? Now, let me tell you this. I was the editor of Base News while this was going on. I was in constant communication with members of our armed forces in Iraq who were training these troops. They were writing for me on the pages of the Washington Times. I was corresponding with them. I was asking them questions. And one thing they kept telling me again and again and again, you don't know how hard it is to train forces that are not used to these kinds of operations to do their job. In other words, they kept telling me this is going to take time. This is going to take a lot of time. I don't know if the American people fully grasps how long this is going to take. The troops on the ground knew that they had to basically stand side by side with Iraqi forces for years to come before they could fully say, you are strong enough to fight. It was a mission that was going to take years. We were in the midst of building up these forces. Then we pulled out. And now you think with just 1,000 of us, 1,000 Americans on the ground, the Iraqi forces, Shazam! They're going to be our partners on the ground. It's a bunch of nonsense. There are no viable partners on the ground right now. And what does that mean? It means, again, just like he told you when he was trying to pass Obamacare, that you can keep your health plan and you can keep your doctor, and then we found out you couldn't. The same lies are being told right now about what we're going to be doing there. We will have to send boys on the ground there. We are already doing so. Listen to how he tries to emphasize again and again what is obviously false.
Now, it will take time to eradicate a cancer like ISIL. And any time we take military action, there are risks involved, especially to the servicemen and women who carry out these missions. But I want the American people to understand how this effort will be different from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. This counterterrorism campaign will be waged through a steady, relentless effort to take out ISIL wherever they exist using our air power and our support for partners' forces on the ground. This strategy of taking out terrorists who threaten us while supporting partners on the front lines is one that we have successfully pursued in Yemen and Somalia for years, and it is consistent with the approach I outlined earlier this year, to use force against anyone who threatens America's core interests, but to mobilize partners wherever possible to address broader challenges to international order.
Well, look, in a nutshell, that's exactly what Bush was trying to do. He was trying to build up those partners where clearly they didn't exist. That's why America ended up remaining in Iraq far longer than any of us wanted it to be so. And right now, what is happening is that the public is awakening to the enormity of the crisis that we are dealing with. And what's interesting is not only is the public saying we have to be vigilant on this war on terror, but now 34% of the American people recognize, once again, we are going to have to commit troops on the ground. He is lying to you when he is telling you that that's not happening now and that it won't happen in the future. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, speaking the truth and always upholding values that are never, ever going to die.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
I think liberals are in denial. More denial. How many of them are missing George W. Bush? As Obama is experiencing a metamorphosis into Bush light, I think many voters are missing George Bush, the real thing, the one who was doing his homework, the one who knew what he was talking about, the one who was leading the public, the one who was saying we have no choice but to do this, the one who was in constant communication with people on the ground, the one who was in constant communication with his entire military top brass and his national security team. The one who told us in 2007 what would happen if we withdrew from Iraq prematurely. Roll it, Brittany.
I know some in Washington would like us to start leaving Iraq now. To begin withdrawing before our commanders tell us we are ready would be dangerous. For Iraq, for the region, and for the United States. It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to al-Qaeda. It would mean that we'd be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. It would mean increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more dangerous.
Wow, and prophetic. Every single thing he said was going to happen if we withdrew prematurely has happened right before our eyes. It would be dangerous for the Iraq and for us if we withdrew, he said. We would be risking mass killings on a horrific scale, which is what we have just seen. We would run the risk of the establishment of a safe haven to replace the one lost in Afghanistan. You're seeing ISIS with a caliphate right now, doing that very thing. and we would risk having to return, which we are doing right now in a weakened position with a weak president who really doesn't want to go back in. The prophet George Bush, he told us what would happen. And how did he know? How did he know what would happen? In 2007, 7 years ago, he knew. Is it because he's so brilliant? Is it because he has an IQ higher than the rest of us? No. It's because he was in constant communication with everybody on the ground, and he had one virtue that this president doesn't have. He understands that people that have been doing a particular craft for years know what they're doing, and you should respect their opinion. You see, President Obama always thinks that he knows more and better than anybody else. Even the commanders, the military folks who do this for a living, who devote their whole lives to the study and conduct of war. No, he knows better. But the virtue that George Bush had was he was willing to delegate. Delegate to people who obviously know more than he did about what they were doing. It's their job. It's because he was just a little bit more humble than President Obama. And he could say, well, tell me, sir, based on your years of experience and expertise, what will happen if we withdraw? And when they gave him a response, he gave credence to their response. But what did our president do? He might ask the same question, but if he didn't like the answer, he just ignored it. And that's why now liberals and Democrats across this country look like they have been punched in the face. They look like they just caught their lover sleeping with somebody else. They can't believe it. They're white. They're ashen. They're disillusioned. They're shocked. They're having to reconsider everything that they thought was real. What is real? What is my reality? If any of you have ever experienced any kind of disillusionment, it consists of being absolutely convinced that something is true and then coming to the shocking realization that it isn't. And when that happens, it's shattering. Because for a couple of moments, you don't know how much of what you thought was reality is untrue. How far does it go? When did the lie begin? When did I start being wrong? And Democrats and liberals across this country are going through a profound disillusionment right now. And it's obvious on practically everybody's face. From Rachel Maddow to Chris Matthews to folks on ABC News this week with George Stephanopoulos, you see these analysts looking shocked, dumbfounded. The New York Times, and we go on and on and on. Oh, they're not going to apologize. They're not going to apologize for how badly they have led this country. But they are going through a profound disillusionment. Listen to one of the biggest champions of the Obama administration, Chris Matthews, in how he reacted to the speech this week.
Yeah, I heard all the necessary conditions, but not the sufficient conditions for defeating ISIS. And I didn't hear in there how we're going to encourage the Arab countries, the Islamic world, to go after ISIS. I didn't hear that. I heard airstrikes by the United States. I heard military training and support for the Free Syrian Army. I heard vague reference to someone over there flying with us over Syria right now without saying what country that was, what ally that was. Nothing really about the building of a posse. And everyone from Richard Ignatius, David Ignatius and others who really know this region are saying the only way you defeat a cancer like this, like ISIS, is within the Islamic world itself. They must find themselves the strength and the determination to go in and erase this blot on their culture. And I didn't hear in this speech how we're going to do that, or if we can't even imagine being the leaders of such an effort. As again, I'll say these are necessary steps. They didn't sound sufficient.
didn't sound sufficient. Translation, the guy doesn't know what he's doing. And I see that now. That's basically what Chris Matthews said on the air. At one point in analysis, Rachel Maddow actually said some of this is stomach churning. So you see, their reality, their perception of reality is cracking. The mirror is cracking. It's going to take them a bit of time to process this. But they're smart enough to ask good questions. The president now wants to be different than George Bush. So this campaign is going to include partners. What partners? Remember, they derided George Bush. He had a coalition of dozens of countries called the Coalition of the Willing. And they said that was just a mask. America was still behaving unilaterally. Well, guess what? So far, Obama is behaving even more unilaterally than George Bush because the coalition is smaller and we don't even know what the coalition is going to do. Arab partners, we're waiting. We're waiting. Arming the Free Syrian Army, the very folks that Obama told us consisted of a bunch of dentists and pharmacists and doctors that we couldn't possibly arm? So Chris Matthews is scratching his head. One moment the president tells us we can't arm these folks. We have no viable partners. The other moment he's telling us, yeah, we can do it. His head's been spinning in every direction. And the liberals keep saying, well, wait a minute. Haven't we been told that the Islamic world should all be doing this themselves? That was our big critique against George Bush. Why are we intervening there? Why don't we let them do it themselves? And here Chris Matthews is saying, well, I don't see how Obama is showing us how they're going to do it themselves. How are the Iraqi going to do it themselves? How is anything going to change? Newsflash. They can't do it themselves. That's why we're there. That's why our allies on the ground, those who did support American intervention, saw us as liberators, as bringing something new to the Arab world. They can't do that. They cannot do it themselves. If they could, they would have. The minute we left, everything collapsed. So Chris Matthews is clearly saying the president isn't making sense. And what about correspondents who are working for the airhead media? They're on the ground. They see the truth. Folks like Richard Engel. Listen to his reaction to the president's speech.
Well, I think I know there are already American boots on the ground where I am now. They are not necessarily firing their rifles or kicking down doors, and we're not going on embeds with these troops. They are troops who are staying away from reporters. They are embedded with local fighters, trying to guide in airstrikes, gathering intelligence, the kind of things that you would have thought the Green Berets would have done many years ago, and which now are being done by Navy SEALs and Delta Force and other special operations forces. Can you conduct a secret war like this, a war by remote control to dislodge ISIS, to dislodge this terrorist group, this militant murderous group from large parts of Iraq and large parts of Syria? We will see. It is an open question. I think the biggest problem with this strategy is that the first part is very clear. He wants to carry out airstrikes to kill enemies who harm the United States. That seems very similar to the kinds of things that the United States is already doing in Somalia, in Yemen. The rest of the strategy seemed incredibly fuzzy, how that there was going to be this international coalition that would lend its moral support of Sunni countries, that you would have to rebuild the Iraqi army, which has lost a tremendous amount of credibility so far, and that you would work with all of these local partners on the ground. There are some local partners where I am. I'm in northern Iraq, in Kurdistan, and there are some local partners here, and we've been out with those Kurdish fighters who work very closely and very well with the Americans. But in Syria, there aren't any local partners. They're fictitious partners that he's talking about. In Iraq, below where I am right now, there is the Iraqi army, which is disintegrated and is not an effective partner right now. So aside from the very specific idea of sending in special operators, carrying out some drones, the rest of the strategy seems still quite unclear.
Unclear, fuzzy, confused. Translation, he doesn't know what he's doing. Basically, you now have the left-wing media concluding that this president is taking us again down the road of war without a clear plan for victory, without a clear definition of the mission, without a clear exit strategy. This is not only the not Bush, it's the worse than Bush presidency. That's what's dawning on them. And now the blame game starts. How much blame do the Democrats and the liberals and this president get for the current mess that we are in, which is a bigger mess than what we faced after 9/11? Listen to Jay Carney and John McCain hashing it out.
Well, I think it was a very weak argument. By the way, I'm astounded that Mr. Carney should say that the Free Syrian Army is now stronger. In fact, they've been badly,
well, that's not what I said,
damaged.
Senator. I said, if I could, sir, what I said is that we know a great deal more about the makeup of the opposition.
Come on, Jay, we knew all about them then. You just didn't choose to know. I was there in Syria. We knew them. Come on, you guys are the ones. It's your boss is the one that when the entire national security team wanted to arm and train them, that he turned them down, Mr. Carney, after a.
Well, Senator, I'm not.
So the fact
I think we
is
have
that
to agree to disagree on this.
No, facts are stubborn things, Mr. Carney, and that is his entire national security team, including his Secretary of State, said we want to arm and train and equip these people, and he made the unilateral decision to turn them down.
Facts are stubborn things, and what the events of the last couple of months has shown us is that George Bush was right all along, and this president, the liberals and the Democrats, got it all wrong. It's time to pick up the phone and call him for his advice. Ask him for apology and ask him what the best way forward is. You're listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that never die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
A little less conversation, a little more action, please. All this aggravation ain't satisfaction in me. A little more fight, a little less fun, a little less.
Welcome. You're listening to Dr. Grace, asking for less conversation and more action. I don't know about you, but I'm so sick and tired of hearing the President of the United States talking a bunch of nonsense while our fellow American citizens are being beheaded. This week, another journalist, Steven Sotloff, joins that gruesome group of folks who were beheaded at the hands of ISIS. It's James Foley and Steven Sotloff. Our hearts go out to the parents that have to deal with the grief of this heinous act. But at the same time, I'm sure that you join me in being utterly outraged. Outraged. And not just at ISIS, but especially at our commander-in-chief, who is not keeping Americans safe. As information unfolds about this crisis, we know now for a fact that our president was given daily briefings about the growth of ISIS for over a year. For over a year, he was told that this would be a possible threat and a danger. And instead of taking action to prevent that from happening, he allowed the cancer to grow and grow and grow. Grow to the point that they now control large section of Syria and Iraq and have created a caliphate, and they have such sophisticated recruitment techniques that they are recruiting fighters from around the world, especially fighters with Western passports. They're recruiting American fighters. They're recruiting British fighters. They're recruiting fighters from Europe. This means not only are journalists like those who we have just lost, not only are they in peril, but we are all in peril, because ISIS is far more sophisticated than Al-Qaeda. Never before have we been under such a dangerous threat as what we face right now, right this minute. Because ISIS, through social media, can recruit anybody from anywhere who can do anything, even on their own. What is happening now is you have individuals who can be radicalized within the United States right from their laptop, right from their iPhone, right from their very computers without having to even travel anywhere. This is a sophisticated group. This is a determined group. And yet, what is most disconcerting of all is that the president knew that this group was growing in strength, and he did nothing. He did nothing. And now he comes forward with these lame statements to the press that even Democratic supporters find revolting. Even Democrats are beginning to distance themselves. None other than thrill up my leg Chris Matthews. He is even saying the president's words fall flat. Listen to this.
Here's a question I put to you about the visceral reaction, which I felt it during the Iranian hostage crisis when I was writing speeches for President Carter. I hate it every day. I love the job, the honor of it. Every day I hate it. I go to a bar, people were mad at me. Because here our guys were just being trooped around and the flag was being burnt, but they weren't being beheaded. I don't think any president can take 2 weeks, every 2 weeks another beheading, or whatever the sequence is going to be. And the president can talk, as Mike did well there, about how someday we'll get them, we'll encircle them, we'll put an alliance together against them, we'll coalition, we'll get them eventually. Eventually, that could be 60 beheadings from now.
How many more beheadings from now before we knock ISIS out conclusively and decisively? That's a really good question. And I like the way Chris Matthews phrased it. Is it going to be 60 beheadings from now? 100, 150? Because you know what the president is doing right now? Instead of acting as the leader of the people who elected him, which are Americans, he is trouncing around the world, trying to build a coalition. Why do we need a coalition when we can go right in there ourselves? Was he elected to be the leader of the British, the Italians, or the Germans? Or our leader? When our boys are killed, you act, Mr. President. We don't need a coalition. You declare war and you act. That's what a strong commander-in-chief does. Instead, this guy can't even get his talking points straight. At a recent press conference, not only has he told us that he doesn't have a strategy to defeat ISIS, it's very clear that from moment to moment, he can't remember what his political advisors had told him to say about ISIS. Check this out.
Our objective is clear, and that is to degrade and destroy ISIL so that it's no longer a threat, not just to Iraq, but also to the region and to the United States.
You know, first of all, if you're saying that you're going to degrade and destroy, I mean, say it like you mean it. Look menacing. That's generally what a commander-in-chief does. He almost says it like in passing. And, we're going to degrade and destroy ISIS. For crying out loud, look in the camera, look him straight in the eye and say, we're coming for you. We're going to destroy you. That's what a good commander-in-chief does. But not only is he not able to convince us that that's really what he wants to do, he then actually contradicts himself. No, you know what? We may just maybe just try to manage them. Listen to this.
We can continue to shrink ISIL's sphere of influence, its effectiveness, its financing,
its military capabilities to the point where it is a manageable problem.
I'm already asleep. Are you asleep? I'm already asleep. I mean, if I were a member of ISIS listening to this, I would conclude he really doesn't have a clue what to do. Now, what he is doing is he is launching airstrikes, and he's sending more and more of our boys there. He just announced that another 300 are going. But wait a minute. We don't have boots on the ground, though. He keeps saying we don't have boots on the ground. But we now have over 1,000 of our boys on the ground. What do you call that? Those are boots on the ground. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not understanding this foreign policy properly. I'm sorry. My bad. They're not boots on the ground, you see, because, quote unquote, they're not in combat roles. You know, Mr. President, I'm sick and tired of your stupid semantics. When our soldiers are in a combat zone, those are boots on the ground. Now, he is trying to have it both ways, trying to act like he's doing something while at the same time trying to preserve his legacy as a man who has ended wars. Well, you have ended nothing. The wars are ongoing, and our boots are on the ground. So stop it with your nonsense. It's not working. Nobody believes it. We can see right through this. Our boys are in harm's way. And what makes matters worse is they're there without a clear strategy and without a commander-in-chief that is truly determined to destroy ISIS. You know why? Because right now, he wants cover. He wants international cover. Remember, he's supposed to be the great peacemaker. He's the Nobel Peace Prize winner. So he can't go in there unilaterally and bomb ISIS to smithereens, which is what any patriotic commander-in-chief would do. No. He has to build an international coalition. Well, how long is that going to take? How long is that going to take? How much more territory does ISIS have to win? How many more people have to die? How many more Americans have to die? How many more innocent Iraqi civilians have to die? How many more Christians have to be massacred? How many more Christians have to be rooted out of their homes? Why do we need a coalition? And by the way, I want to take everybody back to, you remember during the Bush days, there was a coalition, the coalition of the willing. And you know what they said about the coalition of the willing? The liberals derided it. They mocked it. They made fun of it. And now what's Obama doing? He's trying to build a coalition. And he's trying to build a coalition while his very own Democrats, like Chris Matthews, like the clip we just heard, are saying, Mr. President, you're not acting quickly enough. Now is not the time to go around the world shaking hands and trying to get people to defend our citizens. That's your job. That's our job. That's not their job. So I am not only sickened by these events, I'm outraged. And I know that I speak for so many Americans out there. The president hasn't even been able to deliver a statement about the beheadings of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff with the emotion that we all feel. How can he not feel that? How can he not express to the world how outraged we are? These were journalists. They were not even soldiers. They were there simply to record what is happening. An attack on them, it's not an attack on anybody in combat. It's an attack on every civilian in the world. That's what it means when you attack a journalist. Where is his outrage? Where is his passion? And where are his actions? I am sick and tired of this stuttering idiot for a commander-in-chief. Now, you know what? At least we had the vice president who showed some passion. Even though we can make fun of him, at least there was some passion in his statements. Roll it, Brittany.
They should know we will follow them to the gates of hell until they are brought to justice. Because hell is where they will reside. Hell is where they will reside.
That is the kind of statement that our president should be making, and he should be backing it up with actions. rain thunder upon ISIS. That is what we want to see. We don't want to see pinprick airstrikes. We don't want to see our troops on the ground without a full commitment to war. We don't want to see a commander-in-chief stuttering and stammering on the world stage instead of at home crafting a war resolution, declaring war with the full might of Congress. What we want to see is ISIS destroyed now and quickly. And we want to send a message to them and to anybody who dares lay a hand on one hair on an American citizen. You touch one hair on one of them, we rain thunder on you. That is what we want to see. That is the passion we want to see. That is the outrage we want to see. That is the commitment to our people that we want to see. And that would actually, in reality, be true world leadership. Instead, what's our president really doing? You know, if you notice all the pictures that are coming out, he's kind of standing behind the British Prime Minister. He wants to cede leadership to others. If it's not Putin that he wants to cede leadership to, oh, now it's another Western leader. The British Prime Minister is behaving tougher than our American president. And those images now are clear for the world to see. They are laughing at him and they are laughing at us. Because ultimately, at this moment, he is the face that our enemies see around the world. They're not scared. They're not intimidated. They're not going to stop. They are not going to stop. And it is very, very clear that this president is lost. He's just lost. He doesn't really know what he should do, because he's torn between two fundamental problems. One is that he promised to be the leader of a peaceful period in American history. He promised to be the president that would get us out of war. And on the other hand, there is this reality. There is a reality that his withdrawal constantly bumps up against. And it is the hard reality of foreign affairs, which is weakness invites more attacks. And the more you apologize and the more you placate, the more our enemies will seize their opportunity to attack. This president is failing badly on the job, and it is no wonder that we end the week with his poll numbers at the lowest that they have ever been. That is well deserved. You're listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that never die.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.